What's up, everybody? It's time for another edition of the PhinManiacs.com podcast. I am your host, Louis Song, and with me currently is Keith Beattie of the Phinsider with a PH, and joining me very soon will be Chad Ronenbaum, my co-host. And we got a lot of stuff to talk about tonight, ladies and gentlemen. We have much stuff to talk about with not Ryan Tannehill. Somehow it always comes back to Ryan Tannehill. Lamar Miller, Olivier Vernon, Cameron Wake. We got a lot of players that are going to be talked about in the free agent market pretty soon. And also we have to talk about the previous comments made by owner Stephen Ross regarding BullyGate, apparently. We decided to bring that back up. I don't know why. And we also have to discuss what he said regarding Adam Gase and coaching in general. We're going to have to make a decision as to whether or not he meant that Gase had 3 years, whether he was talking about the NFL in general, and either way, is that a good thing or a bad thing? Because it can be interpreted in many different ways. We'll also be discussing very briefly the previous roster moves made by the Dolphins. They cut Quinton Coples and Bryce McCain, even though I think maybe Bryce McCain could have stuck around since he was a pretty cheap option. But we'll discuss that a little more in depth later on in the show. I believe we'll be having Ron Caniff of Unsquish the Fish, who will be making his triumphant return to his podcast very soon, I'm told. We'll be glad to have him on. And if any of you want to call in, you can always call in the show at 1-954-376-5704. We will gladly take your calls, and we will discuss anything that you want to talk about. So first things first, we're going to talk about the stuff that Stephen Ross said. I want to make sure that we get this out of the way quickly. Stephen Ross said in a Palm Beach news conference, I believe, that he was discussing the idea of what it meant for NFL head coach. That's according to the Miami Herald, who went and got clarification on his statement. Essentially, what had been interpreted was that he was saying in regards to Adam Gase that he had 3 years to make the playoffs. Otherwise, we were going to be looking for a new head coach. End of discussion on that. That's just the way it is, he said. Now, the Miami Herald went in and said that that's not what he was discussing. He was not referring specifically to Adam Gase. He was talking more in general terms and speaking more along the lines of the lack of patience in the NFL as a whole. The idea that if you don't win right away, you are fired, and that is something that we at PhinManiacs have been discussing over the past several weeks now. So I'm going to ask you, Keith, which one do you think is the correct interpretation, and do you think it's a good or a bad thing, the one you believe?
Everything that I've read suggests that it's the latter that you mentioned, that he was speaking in general. I don't think he was talking directly at Adam Gase with that. I don't have a problem with the comments per se because, he's right. We spend a lot of time criticizing the football media as a whole and specific parts of it. And, all of that plays into the culture that goes with covering a team and their head coach, and the fact that a lot of these guys just don't have a lot of time. We've seen guys get the boot after a year. Right or wrong, like Mike Mularkey down in 2012 in Jacksonville, he was there a year. He got the boot. Cam Cameron, obviously, 1 year got the boot, although, that was certainly validated, and he had a different regime come in. But everything I saw about Stephen Ross's comments, he's talking about the bigger picture in terms of today's NFL and the stability of the coaching position in terms of what have you done for me lately, playoffs in 3 years or out. Ross says some pretty stupid things. Well, some of the other stuff you mentioned we'll get to. I'm not really sure why he's speaking so freely this week, and just in general, some of the stuff that's come out of his mouth has kind of caught me by surprise. But this is something where it doesn't bother me too much. And if he's talking in general, like I think he is, I think he's right. It's a really narrow, pretty much on the job experience for these guys, in that you're in there and you better produce and produce quickly. There's just not a lot of patience. You look at the NFL and its history. There are teams that have had patience with their coaches. Marvin Lewis hasn't won a playoff game, but he's got his team there. and I mean he remains strictly or firmly entrenched in Cincinnati's plans. So I mean it's different in some places, but I mean that's just the reality of today's NFL with immediate gratification, with social media and how it covers. I mean, no one really has a lot of patience for things anymore. I mean, if you want to go ahead and move the scope a little bit, you can apply the same to really all rookies, all young players in the NFL, and especially at the quarterback position.
But do you think? Okay? With that in mind, do you think that he should have given Gase a 3-year timetable to either pay up or get out? Because a lot of the people are saying that Ross is once again just giving the same crap that he did with Joe Philbin. He's being too loyal. He's just going to let him stick around even if he fails. And the whole idea of he should have this idea of either do it right or get out.
I think that's where Mike Tannenbaum comes in, and you hope that he's able to have some sway in that regard. It certainly sounded like toward the end of Philbin's stay there, going into the interim coaching adventure that this team had last season, and then when it parted ways with Dennis Hickey, it sounded like Tannenbaum was really weaving his way into the close circle that Ross has in terms of how he owns this team, how he oversees the entire product. So, I mean, you hope that, I mean, you like to think if you could go back in time and you had somebody like Tannenbaum in there, I mean, does Joe Philbin make it that far? I mean, I'm not sure. I mean, that's hard to say but I'd like to think that he would have had probably more of a say in there, because a lot of people after year 2 were ready to part ways with Joe Philbin, and he made it past year 3, which also boggled my mind. And I'm not sure why he didn't just pull the trigger and get rid of Joe Philbin when all signs pointed to it wasn't going to work, when he wasn't willing to upgrade or change his staff to better suit the team's needs. When that was apparent, then the cord should have been cut entirely. But I'd like to think that this is when you have these guys in your front office that are going to help shape the future of this team and oversee its progress over the next few years. So to answer that part of it, I don't think it's like Joe Philbin. And with Adam Gase, it's purely a contextual thing. I mean, there's a lot more. It sounds weird to say, but there's a lot more to this than just making the playoffs. I mean, he comes in, and there's a lot of people who have different expectations of what they want from Adam Gase. A lot of people want to see improvement at the quarterback position post-haste. They want it now. A lot of people want to see what his defensive staff are going to bring to the table, in that they've got some really talented people on the defensive side of the football. Why are they still such a middling defense in this league? So you've got people who want different things. I think that the put up or shut up is making the playoffs, but there's a lot of expectations and a lot of intricacies that are going into this Gase regime and the expectations around it. So I don't know if it's really fair to say, like, well, it's just the playoffs. There's a lot of stuff that needs to be taken care of here.
Yeah, okay, so that's your thoughts. Now I'm gonna go ahead and bring in our guest for the night, Ron Kniff of Unsquish the Fish. I'm sure a lot of you have heard that podcast and are probably thrilled that it's coming back. So Ron, nice to have you on with us, man.
Hey, what's going on, man? Can you hear me?
Yep, we sure can.
All right, awesome.
All right, so I just asked Keith of the Phinsider with a PH a very potent question, and okay, so I'm gonna give the circumstances to you. Stephen Ross has recently come out and stated that either in general terms or specifically to Adam Gase, there's two different kinds of ways to interpret it at this point. That if after 3 years we haven't made the playoffs, then we're looking for a new coach. Now, whether he's speaking in general or for the Dolphins specifically, that's up to the interpretation of the viewer, since nobody can seem to come to a general consensus. Now, given the circumstances, which way do you think he meant it, and do you think he should have or shouldn't have?
I think he meant it in general, honestly. And I mean, 3 years, I guess for Ross's expectations, that's not unrealistic expectations for Ross. 3 years, I'm surprised he's given him that much. But I think he meant it more in general in the NFL. I don't know that he was specifically speaking about Gase.
And do you think that, okay, so with that in mind, do you think that Ross should have given Gase only 3 years?
No, honestly, I think he needs to get the full contract, but let's see what kind of moves they make as to indicate as to whether they're truly trying to win this year or they're accepting a bit of a rebuild mode team.
Okay, so my thoughts really are simply that it takes at least 3 years to even get a vision in place. Now, Joe Philbin got his 3 years, failed miserably, and it was actually pretty clear that even after 2 years that it just wasn't going to work. So that in itself was a problem for Stephen Ross. Now, for Adam Gase, who I think we can all agree is already monumentally more qualified for the job than Joe Philbin ever was. I mean, you look at his pedigree, you look at his respect around the league, even before being with All-Pro quarterback Peyton Manning. I mean, he didn't always have Peyton, and even then, he was getting high praises from people around the league. So then, I personally feel that if you're going to have Adam Gase, you have to give him at least not at most at least 3 years to get his vision in place and then expect playoffs. We all know that this team has a lot of holes on it. We all know that this team has a lot of philosophy that needs to be rebuilt, needs to be moved around, needs to be all of these things. There's talent on this team. Don't make any mistakes about that. But it needs to be utilized in a way where we can get the best out of these players. And who knows, if Gase is really this miracle worker and he can put together an offense that functions to the best of the players' overall ability, if he can quote unquote fix Ryan Tannehill, if he can, and Vance Joseph can make the defense something that's actually worth respecting again, then maybe we will be contenders. I'm not going to make that prediction because not only would that be irresponsible, I feel it would be unrealistic. But with that in mind, I think that Gase has a lot more to offer than Joe Philbin ever did, and to expect him to make a turnaround in less than 3 years, I think that's insane, and I don't think it's fair to him to only give him 3 years to work with. You need to give this guy time, and yes, it requires something that a lot of people just don't have anymore, which is patience. Patience is a virtue, ladies and gentlemen. It should not be a rarity.
Agreed.
I think it is in general. Honestly, I think a lot of people are going to make anything of what Ross says at this point, and that I think a lot of people still point the finger at him for exactly everything you mentioned regarding the filled-in mess. So, I mean, he's under scrutiny anyway, and there are times where he really needs a PR coach in terms of comments he makes or just how he generally carries himself in some interviews. But I think that he's speaking from a place of today's NFL owner, and that you make this hire, and you'd love to see Adam Gase get the full contract. But it's just that people have such a quick trigger finger when it comes to things like this that it doesn't take much for entire coaching regimes to get the boot in a few years. When before they was expected 3 to 5 years to really put yourself out there and see what you and your staff are capable of achieving. So.
That's just my thoughts on it. And if you want to give your thoughts on it, ladies and gentlemen, you can always call 1-954-376-5704. We're taking your calls all night long. We're willing to talk about anything you want to talk about, including this topic. Now then, continuing on with the whole idea of Stephen Ross, there were also the comments made about BullyGate being all about racism. Now, I don't agree with that assessment at all. I think that's a dumb statement. I think that based on everything that we've heard even just in the previous year, I think that is an incredibly foolish thing to say, and I guess I should say that it's routine somewhat for Stephen Ross. I'm not going to begrudge the man for putting together an initiative to help the African American male in the football world and in sports in general. He did create an initiative just for that. But for him to suggest that BullyGate was a product of racism, while most of his players were on the side of Richie Incognito, ironically enough, so that suggests that he's essentially saying that all of his black players that were on Richie's side were also racist. So that in itself not only is dumb to say, it just doesn't make sense. So I want to hear your thoughts on it. I'm going to start with you, Ron. What do you think about this whole thing?
Well, I read those comments yesterday, and I was just thought they were really odd. I was like, those comments just don't make sense to me. When I thought about it today, I thought maybe he was talking about the media hype over it more than the situation itself. That's my only guess. I don't know. He hasn't really clarified what he meant that I'm aware of. I think he really needs to come out and do it. But I will say this. Thank goodness that comment came from the owner who you can't fire instead of like a coach or a player or Tannehill or something. I mean, it's going to be a little bit of a media stir, but could you imagine had that come from a different person in the organization? That would have been First Take, Stephen A and Skip Bayless, 2 hours talking about it. So I mean, I'm just thankful for that, but I think he needs to clarify what he meant. He might have meant the media reaction to it rather than the situation itself, but I really don't know.
But that doesn't make sense to me either, because I mean, if he's really talking about the media reaction, then he's basically saying that the media were racist towards Richie Incognito for assuming that he was being a racist. So I don't know. I guess that's reverse racism in nowadays. I don't understand. I don't think it's a very tricky concept.
Yeah, I like I said, I'm just taking a guess as to what he meant. I'm not saying what he even meant was right. I didn't understand the comments when I read them. I just thought they were odd. I couldn't believe he said it. I was surprised. I'm like, why are we digging that skeleton out of the closet? Please, that took this team so long, and we lost the whole O-line just about off of it, besides Pouncey. So yeah, I don't know. I just hope that he comes out, he clarifies it, it gets put to bed, and that the mainstream media, the national media, doesn't go running with this. I don't know if they have already. I haven't seen any national ESPN shows or anything like that today.
How about you, Keith?
The first thing I thought when I read that he said that the cause or the problem was racism was I remember there were some racial tones involved in that entire situation and investigation. I know that there is, for lack of a better description, that Richie Incognito's teammates considered him to be black. I think that was pretty much the general description as to the tone of the locker room with the offensive line and beyond in terms of Richie Incognito's teammates. But I have no idea what Stephen Ross is talking about here. I'm not sure if he was just out to lunch that day or whatever, but it didn't make a lot of sense. And as Ron pointed out, why are you even bringing this up at this point? I mean, you've got a new regime in here. You've got things to look forward to. I mean, if you're fortunate and you hit right on this coaching hire, I mean, sooner rather than later, you're gonna have some exciting things pretty much on the horizon. So I don't really get why you're even bringing this up, unless it was a question that was asked of him, and I wasn't under the impression that was the case. So I don't know what he's talking about. I don't know why he's putting himself and ultimately us too through all this, but it doesn't make a lot of sense. And hopefully at some point it's clarified, even though it'll probably be done from a PR standpoint, that it comes across as something that's not quite as sincere as what we're looking for. So
I don't understand why he said it either. Just the very idea of bringing it back up, just bringing it back up doesn't make sense to me. Not only his comments didn't make sense, bringing it back up didn't make sense. And you know what? For all the things that I often defend Stephen Ross for, and often get called out for daring to defend this man, I can't defend him on this. I mean, there was literally no reason for him to say that, and what he did say just didn't make sense, and it will bring a lot of it will eventually bring a lot of problems, because for him to suggest that it was about racism, well, actually, then again, I take it back, guys. You know what? I think that is a pretty good PR stunt, because let's be honest let's be honest about what the media really does here, okay? They love a story about somebody being racist. They jump all over that kind of thing. And for him to pin the blame on Richie Incognito, because even if he was talking about the media, that's not how the media is going to interpret it unless he comes out and clarifies what he said. It's going to be interpreted as him saying that Richie Incognito and his teammates who were on his side were being racist towards Jonathan Martin. That's obviously going to be what the media will say, because that makes the best story. Stephen Ross is acknowledging that Richie Incognito, the dirtiest player in the NFL other than Ndamukong Suh, who is also a Dolphin now, ironically enough, was being a horrible, horrible person, and there is no excuse for that. So I guess this is his way of saying, hey, look, I knew this was a problem, and this way I'm saying we will fix this. It is good for my initiative. I am trying to remove all racism from the NFL, and sports in general, which is something that he is doing. So I guess if you look at it from that perspective, I guess it makes sense. We have a caller calling in now. Caller, reveal yourself, please. Hello? 135234. Are you there? Okay, so apparently there's nobody on the line here. I'm gonna go ahead and keep it here in case they decide to speak up. So I don't know if you guys have any thoughts about what I said just now, because it really could seem like it could be interpreted as a PR stunt, kind of a way of bringing awareness to his own initiative.
I don't know. Ross seems like an old school guy, so if that's the case, and he has somebody feeding that to him, which I mean, it could absolutely be the case, but I don't want to sound like a person who just wants to sweep this under the rug, but that's pretty much the case. Like, there's no reason to bring this out anymore. This was such an incredible burden and just a disservice to that season in question. And as Ron brought up, it pretty much ruined the offensive line, forced a lot of things into place that, as a result, and yet the one thing that should have happened, and this is going to sound ridiculous, but this is the way I felt it, it should have cost Joe Philbin his job, and it didn't. If for no other reason than he claimed he had no idea what was going on in his locker room when it's his locker room. So I don't understand. I don't see the value or the positive in bringing this out at this point. Like I said, I mean, there's a lot of exciting things that could be happening with this team over the next 6 to 9 to 12 months. I mean, this is going to be an interesting season with all the changes. So I don't know what he's doing. I'm not certain of the full context at this point. I'd like to have more of it brought out in terms of the overall discussion, because, I mean, one thing you mentioned is the media is very good at bringing out one quote and really blowing it up into something it's not. And if you're not a careful speaker, then that can become a problem for you very quickly. So I'm not sure, but I don't understand why this has to be even a discussion at this point. Why are we talking about this? Why is he doing this?
Because he's not the smartest guy in the world. I guess he's not football wise. He's a brilliant businessman, but that's pretty much the only thing he's brilliant at.
It could come down to common sense. I mean, there's a difference between book smart and just having common sense and street smart, and it could just be something where he's just not thinking. Or, I mean, the guy needs a net, or a buffer in terms of like when he speaks. I'm not sure. He said some curious things this week. It could be blowing up. I don't know. But, I mean, it's just, it does no one any good to sit there and rehash this entire thing, especially when it was absolutely beaten to death several times over when it happened in the next month, couple of months after it.
Yeah. All right. So we're going to go ahead and move on to the next topic. But if anybody wants to call in and give their 2 cents regarding this, you can call in at 1-954-376-5704. We'll be gladly taking your calls. And I'm going to keep saying this all night long, since I want to make sure that everybody knows the number to call if they're listening. I don't want to say it once and then just kind of move on from then. So So we're going to talk about some more stuff. Next, we're going to discuss the roster moves that have been made recently by the Miami Dolphins. They parted ways with Quentin Coples, saving them almost $8 million in cap space, and there is no dead money because all that money would have been guaranteed if he had wound up staying on the roster. So by cutting him now, the Dolphins have essentially saved $8 million, and then they saved another 2.5 with cutting Bryce McCain. Now, I personally feel like that Quentin Coples was an obvious cut since he's going to be a lot of money and he wasn't all that spectacular anyway. But Bryce McCain is a little bit of a brain puzzler to me, not because he was anything special, but rather because he was just so cheap. And if you put him in the slot, then he would be a quality cornerback. That's what he was good at, and he was put out of position. So I'm going to start with you. Ron. What are your thoughts on the moves, and do you think we should have taken a different approach?
It pretty much for me, and you and I have gone back and forth a little bit on Twitter, and you had said Grimes is here to stay, and I said I don't know. When we cut McCain, you're right. You can't get rid of Grimes now. What are you going to do? Go search for 3 cornerbacks in one off season? I mean, so pretty much that meant that they're moving on from McCain. They didn't feel he was a right fit. It might have even been the new DC thinking what I want to do. And but they're going to have to keep Grimes because they have no other choice. They still now have to find 2 cornerbacks that are worthy starters, honestly. But I think he was pretty cheap, and we never really did get to see him playing the nickel cornerback spot. And we talked about this last year, Lewis, that liked the move, picking him up, but we wanted him solely to play nickel because when he first came on the team and he did that first interview, and before the team had got to him and say, here's your talking points, we want you to say this, he said, I'm a nickel cornerback, that's what I like. But then the team got to him and said, no, we want you saying you could start on the end, you could start on the, on the starting corner, you can start on the edge. And then he started saying that, but I went with his initial response of, I'm a nickel cornerback, and we never got to see him do that. So I don't know. I'm not sure exactly what the story was there. I didn't think he was good when he played, but like you said, he was out of position.
Yeah, it reinforces the news we'd seen out of the Dolphins organization that Vance Joseph wanted Brent Grimes in the fold. So I mean, if you're just guessing, you assume that because I mean the guy was so inexpensive. That it's purely a preference for Vance Joseph as he tries to largely rebuild the last 2 levels on defense. So, I mean, it would have been nice to get a little more of a look at what Bryce McCain could do before parting ways with him. But, I mean, it's going to sound ridiculous to say because I know a lot of people are still iffy about Vance Joseph just because of the similarity in employment that Kevin Coyle had coming from the Bengals and being a defensive backs coach and everything. But, I mean, Vance Joseph did really good things with Cincinnati's secondary, which, I mean, has a decent amount of star power, but isn't just a Legion of Boom or even in Arizona in terms of just, like, pure star power back there with some of his players. I mean, he got a lot of production out of some good guys. So, I mean, if this is something he thought needed to be done and he didn't need Bryce McCain in the fold, then sure. But it also suggests that, I mean, these guys are going to be are going to be buyers when it comes to free agency and if they look at some of these cornerbacks. And I know that Trumaine Johnson's the name that keeps coming up. That guy seems like an absolute Vance Joseph style corner in that his physicality and skill set matches a lot of what Cincinnati had in guys like Drake or Patrick and whatnot. So definite buyers now. He's got Grimes in there. No turning away from that. And then you've also got the draft as well. But I mean, it kind of hints at future plans and just shows that, I mean, Vance Joseph is, well, I mean, you certainly hope, but I'm willing to give him the benefit of the doubt. I think he has a plan in place for what he wants to see in terms of skill set. I don't think Bryce McCain was a part of the plan.
Well, if that's the case, then as Ron mentioned, we're going to have to look for a bunch of new corners, and we're going to have to do it in a really cheap way of doing things because let's be honest about this. We still don't have a whole lot of cap space to work with here. Part of the cap space that we got is actually only half of the cap space we cleared because we were already $5 million over the cap before we cut Copels and McCain. So with that in mind, we're going to have to really start looking into the bargain basement unless we do that restructure with Ndamukong Suh, which nobody wants to happen anyway because they're essentially because nobody wants to actually have that price tag pushed back beyond this upcoming year. They just okay. I'm gonna say this, and I'm probably gonna get a lot of hate for it, but I think we should restructure because it's not about. I don't know if maybe they're just scared of the future, or maybe they just really want to have the freedom of saying goodbye to the one of the best defensive tackles in football. If you don't want me to say that he's the best anymore, fine. He's still one of the best, and I don't think anybody can really argue against that. So if you want to move on from that, okay, fine. I guess we're gonna get to replace that kind of productivity. I don't think that's going to be that easy. So if you want to just let him have his price tag now because you want to move on from him in the third year, I don't know. It just doesn't seem to make sense. Dolphins fans want Ndamukong Suh's money to get to him now, so that way we can move on from him later if we need to. Now, if they're worried about injuries, then I guess I can understand that reasoning, but I don't think Ndamukong Suh has ever given anybody a reason for him to be worried about injuries. In fact, has he ever wound up missing a game yet? I'm not even sure if he has.
I don't think because of injury, possibly because of suspension.
Yeah, he's been incredibly durable.
Yeah, his durability isn't a problem, but you mentioned suspension. Ron, he pretty much kept himself out of trouble this year. There were a few close calls, but if we looked at the replays, then we can see pretty easily that there was nothing there. And we're not just saying that as Dolphins fans, but it's like...
You're talking about the Washington game, the helmet kick?
Yeah, that wasn't a kick.
Yeah, well, the supposed quote-unquote helmet kick.
Right. Right. So if they're worried about suspension, then that's even crazier because, I mean, let's be honest about this. There was no indication of Ndamukong Suh being this monster, wild, crazy person who was going to eat somebody alive on the field. It was just this simple matter of people getting upset because there was something there. Look, he touched the guy's helmet. It's like, so what? Did he kick somebody in the groin? I didn't see that. Did he kick somebody in the face? Nope, there wasn't anything there either. So I don't think, if anything, I think Richie Incognito has earned the title of dirtiest player since Ndamukong Suh has kept himself pretty much out of trouble. And if I'm going to be perfectly honest, Richie Incognito has pretty much kept himself out of trouble recently, as far as I'm aware.
Yeah, wonder why.
One thing to keep in mind about Ndamukong Suh is, I mean, the guy is going to play on the edge, but I mean, I don't think he's ever playing out of control. That's a weird thing to say, but I think that he's trying to intimidate people. And when you mentioned the hits that he had this year that came into question, the Brady hit, and a lot of stuff that he did throughout the year in terms of just really leaning on guys. I mean, not stuff that ever comes up in conversation as like that was a dirty hit, but I think he knows what he's doing. I think he's pretty intelligent. But another thing that you mentioned about wanting to pay all of Ndamukong Suh's money now, and it's an interesting thing in that he's still relatively young. I mean, it's not like they got him in the twilight years of his career, as you often do with players of this caliber after his former employer's done with them. So, I mean, it's a tricky thing in that you're paying him a lot of money, but you could also make the case that his best football could be still in front of him. I mean, he's in incredible shape. I mean, he's been durable. I didn't see any signs of him slowing down this year, despite the fact that, I mean, he had a double team on him relatively the entire year, and sometimes a triple team. So I don't have an issue with that, but I also wouldn't think of grilling you for restructuring. And a lot of people look at it as robbing Peter to pay Paul, and I mean that does make sense because you're pushing back all of that cap money. But I mean, if it's something that has to be done, it has to be done, and then you just trust the front office to go ahead and make the best decision there. But I thought that I like the fact that Ndamukong Suh plays on the edge. I don't have an issue with that. Maybe it reminds me of the old school football that it's funny to look at the 80s and 90s and think of it as old school football, but compared to today, it's a completely different game in several aspects. So I like the fact that he plays with an edge. I like the fact that Jordan Phillips started to play with an edge. when he was with it in Dominican Sue. I mean, this is a defense that for the most part this year was walked over time and time again. So I mean, whenever these guys were able to really assert their will and throw it down, whether it was like Olivier Vernon taking that one shot at Brady at the end of the season, or just I mean all the stuff that came through this year, I don't have a problem with that as long as they're not just going over the top, just playing like complete jackasses, or stepping on like going the whole stepping on Andre Giroud's head, something like that. I mean, you wouldn't want anything that's like an actual penalty. But if these guys are going to play with an edge and they're bringing that down there, like I don't have it, and don't go the Bengals route either.
And that's all. That's my point about this, is that if you can't really be worried about him being suspended, because it's everything is every year is a new year. And if we really want to be honest, the dirtiest player on the Dolphins team right now is Olivier Vernon. I mean, wouldn't you agree with that?
Yes.
There you go. So go ahead.
No, I just said yeah, absolutely. I don't know if that's even up for debate right now.
So, yeah, if anybody should be worried about suspensions, it's OV. Okay, so my co-host, Chad Ronnebaum, has joined in the show. What's up, Chad?
Hey, guys. Sorry I'm late. Not a whole lot. Just enjoying the boring off-season as usual, waiting for football.
Yeah. The boring off season. This is actually my favorite part of the season, if in a way, because this is whenever I would play Madden, I always enjoyed like trading and building my team the way I wanted it more than actually playing the game itself. I don't know, maybe I'm weird that way, but that's just me. So seeing what the Dolphins are going to do is actually fascinating to me. So I'm gonna go ahead and ask you the question that I've been asking everybody else, Chad. And if anybody else wants to call in the show and give their 2 cents, you can call in at 1-954-376-5704. You can call in and we'll discuss anything that you want to talk about, or we can discuss this topic we're talking about right now. I asked the question just now, Chad, about whether you thought or not that the Dolphins made the right decisions in cutting Quinton Coples and Bryce McCain, who only saves about $2.5 million on the cap by cutting our veteran corner who was supposed to be in the slot but wasn't this year because reasons.
Yeah, I mean, Coples is a no-brainer. I mean, I was fairly unhappy when they got him last season, not because they wanted to take a look at him, but it was just such a risk. If he got hurt, he would have counted $7 million on the cap this year. So I mean, he was a no-brainer. He didn't do enough to me to justify a $7 million cap hit. So I wouldn't be 100% sure we wouldn't see him back on a different contract, but I'm fine with it. Bryce McCain, he's a hard one to figure because he really got torched in that Buffalo game in Miami early in the season. They were literally picking on him, and I think they probably took a look at him with the new coaches, and they decided that they wanted to use that money elsewhere. So he wasn't anybody that had a high ceiling or I had high expectations for. So neither of them were surprising to me.
I think the biggest problem, though, Chad, was that Bryce McCain, like we've been saying this pretty much all season long, is that Bryce McCain was playing out of position. We all knew going in that his ability was primarily in the slot. And Ron brought it up earlier when he gave his 2 cents, is that Bryce McCain said coming in that he was a slot corner, he was comfortable in the slot, and then later on he started saying, well, I can play starting corner too, possibly because the Dolphins told him to say as such. So I really feel like that Bryce McCain was given a bum rap because he was playing out of position.
I don't disagree with that. I don't know what the new coaches looked at, but I mean, clearly he wasn't an enormous cap hit, so they must have decided they weren't going to have him around. I don't know that he is outplaying Lippett or Bobby McCain right now. I think those guys are probably have moved up a little bit. They showed some flashes later on in the year, and those will be the guys they're going to be working with in training camp that would be fighting for a guy with a spot with a guy like a Bryce McCain. I don't think either Lippett or Bobby McCain will be one of the starting boundary corners to start the season. I think Lippett has the ability to do it. I think McCain could play either slot or on the Bobby McCain. I mean, could play in the slot or on the boundary, and I think they were both ahead of Bryce McCain right now. And so I know it's only a couple $1 million, but they'll probably use that money elsewhere.
Okay, so all right, so that's your thoughts on them. I'm gonna ask your opinion real quick, Chad, because since you didn't get to add your discussion on this, what do you think about the comments made about from Stephen Ross? First, I'm gonna ask about the 3 years. Do you think he meant it about Gase? Was he talking in general? And which one do you think he was right in saying so?
I put very little credibility on anything that Ross says. I don't think he's a really good football mind, and I think he just speaks to speak sometimes. So absolutely, there's no way 3 years. I mean, if the Dolphins went 0-16 this year and just made one bad move after another, he could be gone. They could finish 8-8 for 2 years, and he could get an extension. We've seen it happen with Philbin, so I think the 3 years is meaningless. I kind of wish I'm not a Ross hater. I like the fact he's doing everything he can do to win, but I really wish he would just avoid talking with the media altogether because when he makes comments like, "Oh, Gase is the next Parcells and Belichick," that's like drafting a quarterback and saying, "Oh, yeah, we just drafted the next Marino or Montana or something like that." You have no idea what Gase is going to do, and so, like I said, I just pretty much put very little credibility that when it comes to football, Ross knows what he's talking about. I don't mean that terribly, but that's just my opinion of him.
So, do you believe that he was discussing specifically regarding Gase?
When he said he thought he was going to be the next Parcells, you mean? Or
No. The 3 years.
No, I don't think. I think that's just a general parameter for a coach in general that you expect them to have a team winning in 3 years. But I don't think. I think it's meaningless coming from Ross because you can't just go off time. You've got to go off circumstance. And so to me, I would say what happens in those 3 years will drastically impact if he'll have any more beyond that. And like I said, I don't know that Gase gets 3 years either. If Miami is just terrible this year and they're he's struggling all around, to say for sure he'll be back. That's just not how the NFL works. It's a business where people expect results. I'd be stunned if Gase were here shorter than 3 years. I think he's going to get that chance, but like I said, to me that's a meaningless comment. That's like saying that we're going to have a player here for the next 3 years, but he could be hurt the first game or something could go wrong, and so that's just what I'm high on Gase. I'm not against him, but I don't know how you would have any idea how long he'll really be here for.
Okay, so and the other thing that he brought up was that BullyGate was a product of racism. What are your thoughts on that?
Oh, that's again just. I wish he would just not talk to the media. That's if I step away from that comment, hear him say it, I see absolutely nothing positive out of talking about BullyGate whatsoever. So I just stay away from that one altogether. I'm feel pretty strongly that Jonathan Martin was the primary cause of BullyGate. Not that there wasn't racist comments being made, by Richie Incognito on the phone, but to me, Jonathan Martin was doing just as much stuff, involved in it as well, and I think Incognito really got a raw deal in that. Not that he was innocent by any stretch, but he kind of got run over by the bus that Jonathan Martin pushed down the hill, so to speak.
Again, as far as I'm concerned, like I made this analogy when BullyGate first came up, is that I had a lot of friends who we used to play basketball at a park nearby, and there would be words thrown about both white and black, and everybody was totally cool with it. You know why? Because they knew each other, they knew what the context was, and they were buddies. Whether that's right or wrong is up to viewer or listener discretion. Most people would probably say it's not okay, but nevertheless, in that community where everybody was friends with each other, it was okay. Apparently, the only one it was not okay to was Jonathan Martin, because Jonathan Martin was the only one who had a problem with it.
Well, I think what got lost in all the BullyGate was that Jonathan Martin's, I don't know if both of them are, at least one of them were, attorneys that specialize in workplace.
Yeah, I think they were both, and they both graduated from Harvard. So
yeah, and I think that had a lot to do with it because I think they're looking at it from a court case where you have like workplace harassment and you're applying it into a place like that. And so I'm sure you could find any construction crew or, blue collar jobs where people talk like that and they don't necessarily mean it like the way people take it all the time. But, like I said, you're talking about something that happened years ago at this point that, Incognito's gone, Martin's gone, and to me, the whole point with Ross, I'm just like, don't talk about it. There's nothing good. There's no positive spin to put on BullyGate other than you're glad it's over.
Or maybe it was to advertise his initiative to eliminate racism in the NFL and the NBA and all those things. Because remember, he was the one that a few months back spearheaded this initiative to eliminate racism in sports.
Yeah, I guess good luck with that. I mean, that's a pretty hard undertaking. I'm glad he's supporting it, and in a sense that as a result of having that happen, they're trying to be proactive, and there's going to be racism to some extent, pretty much anywhere or any facet that you're in. So I don't think you're going to be able to fix that in the NFL any different than anywhere else. But like I said, it's good that he has the initiative. But
Okay, are we back? All right, sorry, folks. We apparently had some technical difficulties here. So, apparently we lost the last at least 2 minutes of footage, so I hope nobody just kind of took off on us. We are still online. We're still ready to go, and we still have a lot to talk about. We should be back online and ready and running properly. So anyway, if you do want to call in, you can call in at 1-954-376-5704. We'll discuss any topics that you want to discuss. Now then, what we were just saying was that we wanted to make sure that Adam Gase had good personnel to work with moving forward, and we really don't care what Stephen Ross has to say about BullyGate. It's done. End of discussion with that. Now then, speaking of good personnel that is needed with the Miami Dolphins, there was a report, and I believe it came from Jason Cole, so we have to take it with a grain of salt. Yeah, well, you know what? It's a report that is actually positive for once, so we do like to hear it, but again, take it with a grain of salt. But apparently, Cameron Wake is almost 100%, and the Dolphins are looking at possibly bringing him back. Now then, this pleases me. Cameron Wake being back almost near at 100%, and I guys, maybe I'm being, I don't know if I want to pat myself on the back or maybe somebody needs to smack me upside the head for being too prideful, but I was pretty confident that Cam Wake would come back and he'd be just as strong as he was before, Achilles or no. I mean, the man, there are just some people who are absolute freaks of nature. It's like you look at like a LeBron James in the NBA. There's just like, the guy is a physical specimen like no other, and maybe, just maybe, even at 34 years old, Cameron Wake is that kind of a player. Now then, with that knowledge in mind that he's almost back to 100%, do you or do you not bring him back even if it is at his current price tag?
If you're asking me, Lewis, I would probably sit on it for a little bit. Achilles injuries. I mean, The fastest I've ever heard is around 6 months to 12 months. I don't know exactly how long it's been since he injured it, but I'm sure knowing Cameron Wake, he's doing everything he can do to get his rehab done. So I wouldn't be excited to pay him $8.5 million unless I saw him on the field back to what he was. I think ideally for both people, it might be better for Miami to try to work out maybe like if they feel like he's doing really well, to work out like a 2-year arrangement with him where he can get that money, but it kind of protects him a little bit and gives Wake another year with the Dolphins maybe.
Hey guys, you can just go ahead and jump in whenever you want. You don't have to wait for me to prompt you.
All right, I'll jump in on it here.
Good.
Until further notice, and again, maybe it's Dolphins pride talking. Until further notice, Cam Wake is one of the premier pass rushers in this league. Even if he's just solely that, those guys are really hard to come by, especially with the skill he has. He even showed it last year. I mean, it took a little bit to get going, but he was just on fire. I know there's the Achilles injury, but if you look at the money that these premier pass rushers get, $9 million is a bargain. So we need to keep the contract. If you want to try and negotiate with him, go ahead. I mean, if I'm his agent, I'm telling you, no way. There's just no chance. Keep him at the money he's making, bring him back, and just let it ride, because I think that he is worth it. I mean, OV is probably getting ready to get 10 or 11 million a year, possibly.
Maybe
OV,
more than that.
Yeah, OV isn't half of Wake, in my opinion, honestly. So I say you keep him at the contract. I think he's a bargain, and he's still a great pass rusher, in my opinion.
Yeah, the bargain part is a great point. And if you're mentioning Olivier Vernon too, I've seen that the expectation is 14 to 15 million, which is pretty absurd when you consider the franchise tag is 15.5 million. So, and the thing is considering today's game, especially what we just watched in the Super Bowl, I know some team's just gonna get in their head that Olivier Vernon's gonna be able to give them some sort of comparable pass rush output. So, and they're going to pay him a lot of money. And I just think that if you're losing him, then I mean you're paying around $9 million for Cameron Wake, and it kind of seems like a no-brainer. The other side of it, though, is the Achilles injury. Everything I've ever seen about Cameron Wake, he's kind of like a mutant in how he's able to recover from things. I mean, the guy is in just incredible shape. I mean, he's not a spring chicken. I mean, the guy is, 34?
Yep.
Now, so, I mean, he's at an age where a lot of guys are slowing down. I mean, as long as he can stay healthy, I really don't see that from him yet. I think that, I mean, also consider the fact that he didn't have a lot of wear on his tires prior to going to the CFL. I mean, he was working as a personal trainer, and I think he was working in like insurance or some sort of office job that he had. So you're still getting a really good product with him. And I mean, the guy is absolutely like bent over backwards, just doing everything he can for this team. And I mean, if he's able to give you a good product when he's able to come back, and you hope it's sooner than later, yeah, I mean, you can go ahead and talk to him about doing some sort of deal. I don't really see that happening, especially as Ron mentioned. I mean, $9 million for a pass rusher of Cam Wake's caliber is pretty hard to come by in today's NFL. So it's a little bit of a guessing game, though, and it's not a decision I necessarily want to make based on the Achilles. So I don't envy Miami's front office for having to do this, but there's no way that I'm paying Olivier Vernon that much money. So I mean, you gotta go ahead and either take a risk in one direction or go ahead and overpay a guy in another direction. So I know which way I'm going, and that'd be Cameron Wake.
Yeah, on that side of it, guys, I agree with you. I'm tentative with Wake because his game is completely predicated on how quickly he comes off the snap and beats offensive linemen. The guy is probably an average run stopper. He's not a big anchoring run stopping defensive end, and he's a bit of a liability in the run game. Ideally, he would always be on the field in obvious pass situations, but I really want to see him with that quickness out of his stance, going up against some NFL linemen. And if he still has that, then the price is definitely worth it. Either way, whether Wake is back or not. With that being said, I absolutely would not pay Olivier Vernon what he's going to get on the open market, and he's going to get substantially more money than Cameron Wake could get just because of his age. I mean, Olivier Vernon is like 25, 26 years old. He's had no severe injuries, so I mean, he's a guy that you can feel very comfortable at his age and health that you can give him one of those big 4 or 5 year deals. He'll get, but as a Dolphin fan and having watched him, he's never been in the vicinity of Cameron Wake and ability to rush the passer. I know he looked good last year at times, and he did come on more towards the end, but I don't ever remember a time in a game where Olivier Vernon just took it over like I've seen Cameron Wake do. And I don't recall Olivier Vernon making near the number of huge plays, causing a fumble or making a critical sack that Cameron Wake did. So to me, I hope they don't feel the need to give Olivier Vernon a huge contract. I think they'd be far better served to maybe draft a pass rusher or bring in a different free agent or something if they have to. But it's just too much money for a player that I don't think is going to be an elite Pro Bowl type. Olivier Vernon is definitely no Von Miller or DeMarcus Ware. I could say that.
I agree.
The bargain part of it, if you really look at it in that kind of a context, I'm actually going to go ahead and let me just pull this up really quick. Over the Cap is a website that we use all the time to just check out what the basic salaries are for players. And I'm curious, and I want to actually see what kind of cash 4-3 defensive ends are making in the NFL right now, just by average years. I'm actually looking at it right now. Cameron Wake is actually, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. He's 9th on the list in annual salary. This is actually made up in annual salary. Right now in 2016, Cameron Wake is going to wind up making, well, no, I'm sorry. Let me take that back. He's averaging $8.3 million. And above him is Everson Griffin, Jared Odrick. How about that? Vinny Curry of the Eagles, Greg Hardy, Chris Long, Charles Johnson, Robert Quinn, and Mario Williams is making the most at $16 million a year. Now then, if that's the case, then if I'm the Dolphins, I'm keeping my hands on Cameron Wake, even if it is at that price, because I don't know how good Vinny Curry is, so I can't make any judgment on that. But he just got a really big contract. Now he's making way more. He's making more annually than Cam Wake will. And Jared Odrick, I mean, I love J.O. He was awesome. I loved talking about Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles with him a couple of years ago, but he's not Cameron Wake when it comes to rushing the passer. I'm sorry. The only ones that I would put in that discussion are Mario Williams, Robert Quinn, and Greg Hardy. And Greg Hardy, of course, has his own set of problems, and somehow he's winding up making more than than Cam Wake. So, with that in mind, I'll take the risk on Cameron Wake and see if he comes back fully healthy.
And remember, go ahead. I'm sorry. Remember, Lewis, you're probably going to be able to add 3 or 4 more guys to that list that are going to jump over Wake once free agency hits, including OV. Yep, including OV. So I just think, I know the Achilles is a little nerve-wracking, but I think risk reward here. You err on the side of keeping him at his contract, in my opinion.
Yeah, and again, it's time. I don't see why. It's not like Miami needs to cut him right now. They have other options to work with, in the salary cap, and Cameron Wake, somebody who I wouldn't probably make that decision on until into training camp, and whenever they can turn him loose to see what he can bring, and if you see the product on the field in camp and in practice, and he shows that explosive quickness. I mean, absolutely. I mean, so I don't see the reason to cut him. I know they're going to want to make some moves in free agency, but they have other options. So I don't feel that they're going to be under pressure to have to cut him early by any stretch.
It's low risk. It's high reward. Olivier Vernon's definitely going to jump him on that list. And I mean, the fact of the matter is, it's just difficult to find 4.3 ends who can produce at that level. I mean, there's only really a handful of guys every year who in the draft who can do that. If you look at the first round, if you look at the top 10 this year, it's pretty much Joey Both looked at as a guy who can play 4.3 end for you. And then, I mean, you see some people trying to project Noah Spence as being able to do that too. Maybe DeForest Buckner, but I mean, it's hard to find those guys. And another, when you mentioned Vinny Curry, him signing that contract was when I think people started to realize that keeping Olivier Vernon probably wasn't going to be in Miami's plans unless they throw out some huge surprise. Another thing is people want to compare Von Miller to Olivier Vernon in terms of just overall play. The thing is, Von Miller's not your typical. He plays in a long gap 3-4 scheme with Wade Phillips, which is why he enjoyed, I think, his best year of overall productivity.
Keith, can you explain what that means for people who may not know what that is?
Well, I mean, I don't want to dominate the whole conversation with this, but essentially what it means is if you're playing the 3-4 scheme typically and you have three guys up front, if you're playing in a two-gap scheme, it means that the down linemen each are responsible for the gap on either side. So if you're playing a one-gap scheme, it means you're only responsible for that one gap, which takes a lot of the guesswork out of it. You've heard about Bill Parcells and that whole planets theory, which is there's only so many guys on the earth who are big enough and smart enough to play the defensive line in the 3-4 scheme. So it takes some of the guesswork out of it. If you're in a one-gap, you're able to it emphasizes speed because you're hitting that hole. You're not reacting so much as you are the aggressor in terms of that defensive scheme. So I mean that's the simplest way I can probably put it. So if you got Von Miller in there, he came out of Texas A&M as a three. They created a position for him at A&M. It was called a jack, where he kind of went between being a pass rusher and an outside linebacker. And then they went to a 3-4 scheme late in his time at College Station. So when Denver drafted them and they were a 4-3 team, everyone was a little bit puzzled because it was like, do they expect him to put on 20 pounds and play the defensive line, or what are they going to do? And they rushed him primarily as an outside linebacker. And you saw in that Super Bowl, his coverage skills are actually pretty damn good. I think there was one point I think he was covering Jericho Cossery down the field, which is pretty impressive. So with Wade Phillips in there with that one gap 3-4, now that they're able to use him naturally as an outside, as an edge rusher, but I mean they're creative with him. They move him over the center. He plays inside and outside because you're talking about that one gap scheme, and he's so fast that he's not someone who has to have that sort of weight and the ability to read the game where he's got to play that two gap. I mean, it's pretty much just seek and destroy. And that's something that everyone saw in the playoffs. He does very well. So, I mean, Olivier Vernon in his dreams is Von Miller. But, I mean, Olivier Vernon has the potential to be a good player, but I should say a very good pass rusher for a good team. But in my opinion, that's not worth $14 to $15 million or a $15.5 million franchise tag.
You hit the point exactly there, Keith. I did a write-up, I don't know, about a week and a half ago on the defensive line in particular, and I that's my point on Olivier Vernon. I don't think he's a bad player. I'd say he's in the top third. I would say he's probably better than 2/3 of the defensive ends in the league, but he's going to get paid like a top 5 defensive end in the league. He'll literally probably be there in salary, and I don't think he's that. I mean, this, you can say like they overpaid for Ndamukong Suh, but I feel very confident Ndamukong Suh is, one of the top 5 or 6 defensive tackles in the league, hands down. That, but I can't say that I have ever seen Olivier Vernon be a dominant defensive end. He's always just been a good defensive end. You can plug him in and expect him to start, but he just isn't that guy that's a game changer to me. He's not a guy that can take a game over. He's not a guy that does that sort of thing. And to pay somebody that's just kind of a solid player, but not an elite, Pro Bowl caliber player, 14 to 15 million just seems nuts in my opinion.
He's going to be someone else's Mike Wallace. That guy he was the top guy at his position. So 31 other fan bases that didn't really know him think, oh, yeah, OV. And they'll just look at some stats. That guy's going to be sick, and he is going to be placed as some team's premier pass rusher. And that fan base and probably that team is going to be disappointed. Honestly, and that's just the way it's going to be. And they're going to think, oh, he wasn't worth it, and yada, yada, yada. He's going to be someone else's overpaid defensive end. The problem for us is we let him go. What do we do now? I mean, Deion Jordan? No, I'm just kidding. But, I mean, like, what are you going to do? That's the thing for us. But everyone's right. You can't pay him the money he's going to get. You're going to probably have to let him walk.
Well, in all honesty, though, Ron, I mean, you brought it up as a joke, but let's say just for speculation's sake, I mean, we're going to have to pay him one way or another. Let's say Vance Joseph can get Deion Jordan's butt in gear. Would that be okay?
I mean, it would, but
he still has the physical talent. There's no denying that. It's just his head.
It's a crapshoot, but you have no. I mean, they're going to let that situation play out. They're not going to cut him. It makes zero sense to cut him. You're going to bring him on the team if he shows up at all, and hopefully he passes the 20 drug tests he's going to have to take a month. And they're just going to see what happens, see if his heart's in it, see if he wants to play. It is all up to Deion Jordan on that. It is out of everyone's hands but Deion Jordan, including the Dolphins. They're just going to let that play out.
I think that's to an extent, but I think the Dolphins have a ton of leverage, and they're probably getting close to making Deion Jordan's situation a reality for him. Now, maybe he'll just completely give up and not want to do it, but the reality is I would think Miami already has him in a position to go after some of the bonus money they've paid him, millions of dollars. And I'm not 100% sure if his season counted on his contract this year. And so because he didn't play the whole year, I don't know that they get enough. They may actually get another year extended on his contract. I'm not sure how that works. If when you get suspended, for something you did, if that counts as another contract year, because I can't imagine they are paying him his contract right now. So that's going to come into play. What's Deion Jordan's financial situation? Because I know he's been given a bunch of money in the form of a bonus, but if Miami decides to say, oh, by the way, Deion, you owe us 3/4 of the bonus money you paid us, suddenly he's going to realize I have no money. And that may change his perspective a lot more than people think when he realizes, like, wow, I've got to, get in shape and go produce because I need to make money or I'm never going to make any money.
Exactly, but that's again why it's still up to Deion Jordan, because the Dolphins will do that. If he comes back again, fails another drug test, and he's gone for a year, they'll go after his bonus money.
Well, he's gone for life if he fails another one.
Yeah, and they'll go after the bonus money. So it's all in his hands, 100%. They're not going to cut him. He's going to be on this team in some aspect, one way or another, whether that's playing here and there, whether that's starting. It is literally up to that guy. He has his entire life in his hands.
Yeah, I think if he shows, and which very well may happen, if he shows up and he's over 300 pounds and clearly isn't going to be able to handle it, they may cut him just to save the $3 million on the cap. But, that sounds crazy, but, the pictures I saw of him on the beach did not look like a guy that was in shape. I don't know when those were taken, but, he clearly isn't hitting the weight room, as of the last time we've seen anything of him. I think is it April? I don't know if anybody knows this, but I was thinking that's when he can begin contact with the team is April.
No, I don't think he can.
It's April.
Oh, it's April? I thought he couldn't get contacted with the team until he got off his suspension.
No,
I think that's when it's officially over.
I think it's officially over in April something. I don't remember the exact day.
So
the date of suspension.
Fortunately, they'll be able to at least bring him in and see if he shows up, one, and if he does, try to evaluate where his head's at and where his body's at, so then they can at least know if they need to address the position prior to the draft. And that'll be a big thing. But if he comes in his head, he's really wanting to come back and play, that might be the perfect guy to figure, well, we can keep him and Wake. And hopefully between Wake's Achilles and Deion Jordan's mental status, one of those two will give us a starter together throughout the year. And then we only really need one Deion. But if Deion Jordan's completely, still out on Mars, then I think you pretty much just have to consider him. I don't know if you cut him, but you got to consider him pretty much a lost cause.
You're not giving me. Go ahead, Keith.
I was just going to mention with Deion Jordan. We covered the the worst case scenario with it, and it's, I mean, you go after his bonus money, or maybe you cut him and you try to save a little bit of cap. But I mean, the best case scenario is that if anyone was going to botch that situation, it was probably going to be the Philbin regime. So I mean, I had this real slim line of hope that perhaps, Vance Joseph and crew get through him, because if they can, Deion Jordan bears a lot of similarities to Michael Johnson in Cincinnati, who's a player that I'm sure Vance Joseph has great familiarity with. So if we were ever fortunate, I'm not really holding out hope, because I mean, this whole situation with Deion Jordan has pretty much been a dumpster fire since we drafted him and trading up and whatnot. But I mean, if they can get there, I mean, there is a significant payoff then, and also in that if suppose he did come back, was in good shape and produces, you're really not in a position to give him a lot of money. Then because you're still, and I think other people would be a little hesitant as well, because you'd still have the training wheels on in terms of trusting the guy. So it's a situation that would be tentative moving on into the next few years, even at best case scenario, which I put it about less than 10% right now. I'm not feeling good about that, but there are significant gifts there that he does have, provided he's not, as still out on the beach weighing what looked at about 300 pounds, looking like Buster Douglas late when that guy was like 400 and some pounds.
But here's the thing: if you're the Dolphins right now, we're prognosticating on what Deion Jordan does. You can't plan on him. I mean, you've got free agency coming up. You got to make decisions. He is not even in the realm of the plan. He's just maybe we get lucky that he comes in and also contributes. Even though you'll see him before the draft, even in the draft, like, you don't know if he's going to pass all these drug tests. So honestly, whatever they do, they'll be doing it, not even thinking that Deion Jordan is part of the equation. So we're kind of envisioning maybe he'll be the other guy. Trust me, and unless the Dolphins are crazy, they're not making decisions based off Deion Jordan. No way in this world. We're just hopeful as fans that maybe he could finally contribute, because third-round pick, we could have had our starting left tackle a lot cheaper than what we got right now instead of drafting him, or just stayed where we were, kept it, our 2 second rounds that year. I mean, it was a good trade. It just wasn't the best pick so far. It's been a bust. But trust me, Tannenbaum and them, there's no way they're counting on Deion Jordan or even considering him in the equation with the decisions they're making from now to the draft.
No, but
the one thing I can say, though, with that, Ron, is I think that if Deion Jordan comes back and in April he mentally seems like he wants to come back and really get after it, I think that makes you a little bit more comfortable to keep awake, because Deion Jordan is still really young. And if you feel like, well, maybe this guy's going to, pull it together, I don't think you're necessarily relying on him this season, but you can look at it like, well, we do want to see it play out still. So I don't know that we want to go out and spend our number 1 draft pick on a defensive end. Rather, let's just keep Wake. Hopefully Wake does come back. We can start Wake this year, and hopefully maybe in 2 to 3 years, maybe Deion Jordan will be in that equation. And so that's the one thing he could possibly give them, is a little more comfort just to roll with Wake this year, rather than feel like, no, we're going to have to take that salary cap money. We're going to have to go sign, a guy that we know is healthy, and we know that we can come in here and we'll just sign him to a 3 or 4 year deal.
It's a difficult situation with the whole pass rusher situation, because with Olivier Vernon, Derek Shelby, he's also on the free agent market, and he's gonna get a decent deal. He's certainly not gonna get big money, but he's gonna get something decent. Then Cam Wake with an unknown, Deion Jordan with an unknown. Essentially, all of our pass rushers except for Terrence Fede is a pretty much an unknown, and even Terrence Fede in his own way is also an unknown, because we don't know we don't know what his ceiling is. He looks like he could be good, like on a Derek Shelby level, but he's not even at that point yet. So every other pass rusher in Miami is a question mark, and that's pretty scary. So we're going to have to keep a very close eye on that. The other thing that I wanted to bring up was that the report regarding Lamar Miller, apparently, according to Miami Herald, and Adam Beasley's the one who wrote this story up, I believe, the Miami Dolphins are more bullish on Lamar Miller behind the scenes than what they're willing to admit. And the possible deal that he may get is somewhere in the realm of $5 million annually. Now, that's actually putting him in between, in annual money terms, that's actually putting him in between Shane Vereen of the Giants and Jamal Charles of the Chiefs. Now, there's a big discrepancy there between talent, because then first you have Shane Vereen, who's down here, and then you have Jamal Charles, who's considered way up here. So again, so the running back money is always a big question mark. It's like, well, he's a running back, who really cares? But then again, with the other reports saying, here's how Matt Forte could fit with the Dolphins, I'm just thinking to myself, Lamar Miller is already a way better fit for the Dolphins, and I think he can do stuff that Matt Forte can do and more. And not only that, he's younger and doesn't have nearly as much tread on his tires. So with that in mind, would you be willing to give Lamar Miller a $5 million a year contract?
That's tough, Lewis. That's so tough. I think I'm not a huge fan of paying running backs big dollar contracts, simply just because it's a position that requires the player to take a large amount of abuse. And so when you put a bunch of money into a running back, you run the risk of having a bunch of money in a guy that's hurt, or you're putting a bunch of money in a guy that plays a limited number of plays because you're doing them by committee things. So I'm never a huge fan, but the issue Miami has is the sheer number of holes they have, and so, I mean, we just covered defensive end. It's almost a certainty that they're going to have to probably draft a defensive end or sign a free agent or two. And so there's already, your cap space and your draft picks that need to address defensive end. We haven't even talked about other positions like, the dumpster fire that is our linebacker core right now. And, we need another cornerback opposite of Brett Grimes if we keep Brett Grimes. And so that's another high, something they're probably going to have to consider putting a bunch of cap space into as a starting caliber corner, or use their number one pick on it. And so as these holes keep appearing that they have to address, that, when we talk about our number two corner, and when we talk about our linebackers, and very possibly when we talk about our defensive end, these are guys we don't even have. And so at some point you got to think, maybe we just need to pay Lamar Miller so that we can at least not have running back as one of these holes we got to fill in our offseason.
For me, honestly, I'm going to go kind of the opposite. I say keeping Lamar Miller is a no-brainer. Here's why. We have watched the Dolphins do this whole get rid of the guys that you have and not pay them, and then bring over some old free agent stopgap guys over and over and over again, and it just hasn't gotten us anywhere. I want to see us keep a guy who's young, who's done a good job behind a porous offensive line and been very underutilized under Philbin, and see what Gase can do with him. If you decide you'd like to bring Forte 2 along with it for a year or two because Gase feels comfortable with that, I'm good with that combo. And maybe still we feel like Miller isn't a 20 to 25 touch game guy. He's still 15 to 17 touch a game. That's fine. I'm not 100% sold on Jay Ajayi yet, so I really don't know where he fits in the equation. But the Dolphins have to stop this not signing the guys that got you, that you finally drafted some talent because we've missed so many times. And then we don't keep the guys we do. We already know OV is going to be overpaid, so we're probably letting him go. You got to keep Lamar Miller. It's not that expensive to keep him. He's still young, and he's improved in my opinion. He's a little better at catching the ball, a little better at blocking, and he's a good runner. He's averaging 4.6, 4.7 yards per carry, but behind this line. I feel like you got to keep them and start keeping your guys and drafting right, and stop trying to go the free agent route all the time, because we've seen that story now for 7, 8, 9 years, and it's the same result: 8-8, 7-9, 6-10 every year. So let's start to do it right for once.
Normally, I would totally agree with Chad on this in terms of giving up the bigger contract to the bigger second contract to a running back. But the funny thing is that the frustration we felt with Joe Philbin's regime and just the lack of touches and lack of use for Lamar Miller actually works out for the Dolphins in that regard. I mean, he's got low mileage on him at this point. He saw really not a lot of action last year, and it was inexplicably so. So, I mean, if you're the Dolphins and I mentioned one of the things that Adam Gase's staff and Adam Gase himself are looking to achieve sooner than later is they want to get more out of the quarterback position. I think keeping the backfield intact does a lot for Ryan Tannehill this season. And, I mean, I hate to say it, but any other quarterback that's in there going forward. I mean, if it's not Ryan Tannehill. But if you keep that back, I mean, Ajayi has talent, and considerably so in some areas. But I mean, they've talked about the lack of cartilage and knee. Not really a guy you want to lean on for heavy touches going into a season, into a second year. So I'm with Ron on this one. I wouldn't call it imperative, but I think it's close. I think that if you're really trying to maximize what the offense can do this year, I think keeping Lamar Miller is a big part of it.
I would agree with that assessment. I mean, Lamar Miller is one of the best running backs we've had in a long time. I think we can safely say that. Like, with all due respect to Reggie Bush, he had his own set of problems, and we actually misused him too. It's actually pretty sad how many running backs we have misused in Miami over the past several years. I mean, the last one that I can really think of that was actually even good in the NFL, and it's actually legitimately good, and not because we just used him like garbage. It was Ronnie Brown, and he even had the 1-2. He was teamed up with an older Ricky Williams, but still an effective Ricky Williams nevertheless for a long period of time. And then when we got Reggie Bush, we misused the crap out of him. He was a scat back who wound up turning into a premier back, and he just didn't have it in him. He danced too much. He wound up getting hurt a bunch of times. Did he get hurt in Miami? I'm not sure, but nowadays he's getting hurt a lot, and we did misuse him in the sense that he was a receiving running back who we were trying to make run between the guards and tackles, and that just didn't work because Reggie's not big enough, and then you bring in Lamar Miller, who he shows he's good, and so as a result, we decide to just not use him. Which
I think I'm not disagreeing with you guys at all. I 100% think we need to keep him in. I think on the bright side, I think the team agrees with you as well. So I think they're trying to work out a deal with him already. That's probably why you're seeing things like Pro Football Talk report it, because I think what Miami's wanting to do is get that message to Lamar Miller right away that, hey, we want you. And I can't say that Miami will be the highest bidder for Lamar Miller, but I do feel very confident Miami's going to make him a solid offer. And so if Lamar Miller wants to stay in Miami, he can stay in Miami and be a wealthy man doing it, even if Miami doesn't maybe want to pay him what somebody like the Cowboys want to pay him. I think they'll do everything they can do to keep him back. And I think it would be in Lamar Miller's best interest to stay with Gase coming. And if Philbin were still here, I would say there's absolutely no way in the world Lamar Miller would be willing to come back. But with the new coach here now, I think that gives Miami a decent chance to get him signed. And it's my hope that he's a guy where, I would consider doing the bonus game with, rather than paying him maybe $5 million a year, maybe you can get him to sign for more in the neighborhood of, maybe $3.5 to $4 million, but you pay a huge percent of it up front in the form of a bonus. So he gets that guaranteed versus, getting maybe a higher per year contract, but a lesser percentage guaranteed. And the reason I say that is because of the points you guys make is he's still young and he hasn't had any serious, problems. He hasn't had his knee torn up twice or something like that. So you're worried, are we really going to get 3 or 4 years out of this guy? I would feel pretty comfortable with Lamar Miller as I would a rookie running back in terms of getting 3 or 4 years out of him.
And remember, too, that they have that 3-day period before free agency truly opens up where the Dolphins get to negotiate with him exclusively before anybody else gets in the game. Now, I know that the real deal is they're probably already doing it, but, legitimately they have that 72-hour period. So I'm hoping to see Lamar Miller locked up before there's any bidding war between us, Dallas, or Seattle, or whoever it might be, because it could get – even I think, imagine him going to New England. I think he could do some things with him. Belichick could. So let's get him locked up in that 72-hour period, because I have this feeling you let it get past that, it's going to get ugly. We're going to lose him.
I'm not convinced that Dallas is going to be a real player for Lamar Miller, because just looking back on the past of the Cowboys, they haven't really been big players in the running back game. They weren't even willing to pay DeMarco Murray his money. And let's look at it this way: if they really have that much faith in their offensive line, then I think that I would think that their mentality is we can literally just go sign the water boy and he can play running back.
But go ahead. I'm sorry. I was going to say maybe 2 years ago, but not now. I think they might have changed their mind on that after last year.
Yeah, I think the Cowboys are going to pursue Lamar Miller. I've already heard through the grapevine they're interested in him. But
is the grapevine Omar Kelly, who wants him to go to Dallas?
It's not Omar Kelly. I've heard it reported in multiple places that the Cowboys are interested in Lamar Miller. That was before the season was over, even. But I'm not so worried about. One good thing Miami has in their favor is I'm trying to think of his first name. His last name's Elliott, the running back from Ohio State.
Ezekiel Elliott.
Ezekiel.
Yeah. He's pretty well touted right now, and so when you throw some talent in the draft like that, that's going to make teams a little more bearish about piling a bunch of money into a running back for the reasons I said earlier. Teams may decide, we're interested in Lamar Miller, but I don't know that we're going to want to run right out early in free agency and pay this guy a bunch of money. Those teams might be thinking, I would rather wait and go into the draft and try to land one of those rookies.
I mean, keep in mind, too, that Dallas is bigger fish to fry right now because, I mean, if not for losing their quarterback position, they win the NFC East going away.
Oh,
and I mean,
that's taken care of. They're going to get Manziel.
Yeah, right.
Keith,
Nice.
I wouldn't put it past them.
I wouldn't put anything past them. Although it sounds like you're starting to see Jerry's kids are getting a bigger say in what's going on here. Whether it's hiding the Johnny Manziel draft card and taking Zach Martin instead. I mean, it sounds like that they're just a bigger part of what's going on. So I mean, I don't know if it's the Manziel thing or if it's Robert Griffin, but that's an incredibly talented team. It's the best offensive line in the league. I mean, the pass catchers are excellent. The defense is an up and coming thing that they still need to improve. And I think that if they don't go quarterback in this draft, I think it's something that you'll see them address. But I mean, they've got issues outside of that backfield. So I'm curious to see how much of an offer they make Lamar Miller. I agree with Chad. I think they will, which is why I also agree with Ron that it would be nice if Miami could lock this up during that 3-day period and just be done with it. Because Lamar's a unique dude in that, I mean, he's a one-cut corner type running back, but I mean, he's built. I think he's around 215, 220 pounds, 220 pounds. And I mean, he was, for the most part, that way when he came out of Miami. I mean, he was a little bit less, but he was always a thick guy when he was there. So, I mean, he's been durable. I think the biggest issue he's had during his playing career in football is the shoulder that he had when he came out of Miami into the draft in 2012. But I think if you're trying to make things easier on Ryan Tannehill, you're trying to go ahead and revamp that offense. You're building to its strengths. It's a lot easier to build to its strengths if you have like a top flight running back there like Lamar Miller, and then you're able to spell him with a guy like Jay. I think that's a nice if you're coming in and you're Adam Gase, that's something you can really build on, especially as you're looking to continue and improve the offensive line and so forth.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Lamar needs to stay, and maybe Keith, maybe they don't want to make things easier for Ryan Tannehill.
Well, I mean, I don't know. That sounds like filled in paranoia, kind of. And I mean, I understand it because everyone worries about that kind of thing. But I mean, it's the same. I think it'd be a huge win for the Gase regime early on if they're able to. I mean, if they're with Tannenbaum and they're able to sell Lamar Miller on staying here, because yeah, he can go to Dallas. And honestly, if Dallas can get their quarterback situation under wraps, then they don't have to worry about Tony Romo breaking his collarbone, or they don't have, John JF doesn't play for free or whatever if he's there. Lamar Miller behind that offensive line would have a ton of success, and he would be in the playoffs because they play in a terrible, terrible division. But I mean, if Gase and crew and Tannenbaum are able to, really convince him to stay here, then I mean, I think that's a big win early on, and that's something that you can build on because I think that Ryan Tannehill's game can get a lot better this year under the right tutelage. And I mean, it just doesn't make a lot of sense to me to halfway strip out the backfield while you're trying to sit there and build things up.
All I know is that Miller is really good. We need to keep him, and I'm ready to move on from this topic. We are just about ready to call it a night. I'm exhausted. However, we do have one more thing that we need to discuss, and I want to do it real quick. It's the franchise tag. With that in mind, the franchise tag is essentially it gives the league average to I believe this is how it works. It gives the league average to a player for 1 year and does not allow them to hit the free agent market. For Olivier Vernon, it would be somewhere around the lines of $15 million. I think that's how it works. Would I be correct in that assessment?
It gives the average of the top 5 paid guys at that
Right.
position.
Okay.
Or like a 120% increase, whatever is more. I want to say something like that.
Yeah,
that's in the case where you franchise tag a guy a couple times. That's when that 120% starts to come into play or something like that.
Okay,
that could be. That's right, Louis. It's the only positive thing a franchise tag does for a team is it does give you leverage, because as the player, you want a longer term deal with more guaranteed money. You don't want just like a 1 year deal in case you get hurt. But in Olivier Verdon's case, if they weren't giving him the deal, I'm sure he would just play for the $15 million.
All right, so the question would be, I guess I'm going to ask all of you guys, is there anybody you would use the franchise tag on?
Mine quick answer would be no, not on the Dolphins. I would not use a franchise tag on Olivier Vernon right now. I think $15 million would be it's just too, even though he'll get that, I just don't think. I think they could use that money at other positions. I mean, they have holes to fill. I think they really, if they're going to spend free agency money, I think they should spend it on a veteran corner right now, to pair along with Brett Grimes. I just feel like that's what they need to do. So I don't have anybody on the Dolphins I would use it on.
The only I wouldn't either, but the only thought about maybe using it on OV, maybe their thought is, I don't think you're as good as everybody thinks you are, so we're going to make you do it another year under a 1 year deal with the franchise tag. I'm going to be willing to bet that you don't play as well, and next year your price will be lower. That's a possibility, but I mean, $15 million right off the cap on a team that doesn't have the money. I just don't know how they actually logistically make that work, unless they do the whole restructure Sue thing, which I'm not a big fan of.
I
think if
online.
they did that would mean they were going to be moving on. I can't imagine they're going to keep Cam Wake for the $8 million and then go give Olivier Vernon $15 million. I think if they were going to make a move like that, that would mean they were going to part with Cam.
I saw it mentioned online that the only nice thing about OV's Cam thinking that he's worth 14 to 15 million is that because you have that franchise tag in that ballpark at $15.5 million, it's a simple decision for you. You either franchise them and go forward with it, or you go ahead and just not bother and just let them just release them into the sea and be done with it. Because I mean, when you have that kind of money back close to the franchise tag anyway, I mean, it's pretty much a no-brainer. You can either franchise them or you can just part ways, because I don't think you're going to find many Dolphins fans who think that guy's worth anywhere close to $15 million.
No, the only reason I could see them considering it is just, realizing they're going to overpay him, but just deciding we have got to address so many issues. We are just going to overpay OV this year. We're going to see if Cam Wake can respond. If Cam Wake comes back and he's doing a lot better, then we'll let Olivier Vernon go next year, and we won't have any money into him next year. We'll just overpay him this 1 year to keep him so we can address other areas. But I still don't think they're going to do it. But on a side note, since we talked about the franchise tag, I just, we've had a lot of people that, I'm not talking about performance-wise, but the anti-Tannehill, when they gave him that contract extension last year. And, one of the most interesting things I'm going to be curious to see play out is Kirk Cousins right now in Washington. They're trying to figure out.
What is that all about?
Well, they're going to try to figure out, do they franchise tag him, which, that's an extremely high cap number for a 1 year deal on Kirk Cousins, but he's going to command an enormous deal now. And I suspect that Kirk Cousins is going to get a deal a lot bigger than Ryan Tannehill's, and I don't believe he's a lot better than Ryan Tannehill.
I don't think he is. I smell Nick Foles.
He didn't beat a winning team this year.
I smell Nick Foles.
Yeah, but But the point I'm making is they're in a situation where they don't have Kirk Cousins under contract. He's going into the open market now, so they either got to pay him massive, or I guarantee there is a team that'll do it. Somebody like the Jets or somebody will pay Kirk Cousins the money if they feel like he could be a franchise quarterback. And, Miami is in a situation right now. It's like, that Tannehill deal doesn't look that bad right now because they didn't guarantee a huge chunk of it. So if he has a horrible year and he's not the guy, they can walk away pretty much next year without a cap disaster. And if he is the guy, they got him at a reasonable rate. And so I'm thinking, God, I'm just glad Miami isn't in that scenario that the Redskins are in right now, where you have a quarterback where you're not quite sure if you want to give him, a massive contract to be the quarterback or not. Miami's not really in that scenario because of that deal they did with Ryan Tannehill last year.
My opinion is, I was going to say, my opinion is you tag Kirk Cousins. It's the same situation as OV. I mean, make him prove it one more time before you pay him big. I mean, if he proves it one more time, you're not going to be paying him that much bigger than you are now to keep him. Maybe a little bit. I think the risk is worth the reward. Tag Kirk Cousins, make him show you one more time he's the guy. And then if he is, you're going to pay the man. You probably pay the man before the year's over. You're going to just make it happen so he doesn't even sniff the open market. In that case, if he, if they like that. Haha.
Could you imagine, though, if he is the guy, if Kirk Cousins comes out next year and he plays really well and they tagged him? So then he'll be coming, then imagine the money he'll command then if he proves it, that, he's a solid franchise quarterback. You would see astronomical offers from teams that are desperate for him. So even that's not a great situation to be in, because the only way that works out to your favor is if he's not the guy, because you didn't get stuck into a long-term deal with him. But
well, you just said, Chad, that you don't think the money's going to be that much higher, but even then it's still going to be stupid high.
Oh, if he has a really good year, it'll be stupid high. Then he will have proven it, and then you've got to either pay him, the 20% raise over the last year, which he'd probably be approaching the highest paid quarterback in the league at that point if you franchised him this year. So, the Redskins may choose to just franchise him because they're not sure, but either way, where they're at, the situation the Redskins are in, are because they don't have him under contract. I understand why, because of the whole RG3 mess, but the point I was trying to make in it is, the Dolphins have gotten a lot of criticism over the last year because they extended Ryan Tannehill a year early. And so people were like, oh, he didn't earn that contract yet. He didn't do it. And my thought was, that was a great deal for the Dolphins because, they've got him locked up. They're not paying him like he's the best quarterback in the league. And they've got some outs in the deal. And, as you look at what the Redskins are going to have to go through, the point I was making is I thought that was a really good move from the Dolphins front office to lock up Tannehill the way they did when they did it.
I agree.
Which is why I'm giving them the benefit of the doubt with the Olivier Vernon thing. So I saw him taking a little bit of a beating from some pundits because they didn't lock up Olivier Vernon at about $12 million a year prior to the season when they had a chance. And I just think that if they were interested in doing that, they would have. I think that the Tannehill contract proves that they have the foresight and the knowledge and really the cunning to look at the overall cap and what they're paying players, and they were able to really get Ryan Tannehill and what will, if he's able to play, if he's able to improve, will look like a bargain, especially if you got guys like Cousins playing well on a franchise tag, or you've got like now the Russell Wilson deal and all these like mega contracts you have to go into quarterback. So I'm willing to give them the benefit of the deal on the Olivier Vernon front, just because I think that if they really were interested in locking him up long term, I think they would have done so. And if they want to go ahead and almost throw in like a spite franchise tag, I mean, which I don't know. I mean, anything could happen. I mean, we'll see how Tannenbaum handles it, but I think that if they were really that interested, I don't think they would have screwed that up.
It's pretty telling that Washington has cut off talks for a new contract for Kirk Cousins, which means they've either come to their senses and they smell Nick Foles as well, or they're probably going to tag him. So
I don't think they have a choice, Lewis. I think they're going to have to tag him. Yeah. I mean, RG3 is obviously gone from Washington, and if they don't keep Cousins, they're literally starting over completely.
Jared Goff.
Yeah, you think they're going to do that, though? I mean, where does
Why
that
not?
take Washington if Kirk Cousins takes you to the playoffs? So you immediately – could you imagine?
At 9-7, Chad. I mean, maybe they're being realistic about it. The only reason they got there was because Romo was down for the whole year.
Let me ask you this, though. If Miami had made the playoffs this year and Miami was just talking about, I think we're just going to let Tannehill walk and we're just going to draft a Goff instead, how would you feel about it?
Well, I would need to see how he played, first of all. Look, the whole Kirk Cousins thing, people got mad at me for this, for assuming that for not assuming that Cousins was better than Tannehill based off their play right then. Every single thing that was going on in my head was screaming at me, Nick Foles, Nick Foles, Nick Foles. He had one super year, and then he just disappeared again, and now everybody pretty much forgot his name. So the moment somebody starts playing good, he's better than Tannehill, but then nobody says otherwise when Foles suddenly falls off the map. Why is Kirk Cousins getting all this praise for playing against unimpressive teams, flopping on his face when it's teams that are actually good, and then you give this man praise for making it to the playoffs when the strongest team in the division is without their strongest player at quarterback? That doesn't make any sense to me. You're basically giving this man credit for taking advantage of the fact that the Cowboys were out of a quarterback and did not have a backup that could actually get them anywhere. So if that's what you're rewarding Kirk Cousins for, more power to you, Washington, because I don't think that's good enough. If Ryan Tannehill had made the playoffs and Tom Brady was out for the whole year for New England, I would not have been impressed.
I think you're seeing, the value of the quarterback position because, if you don't have a good quarterback, even a decent quarterback, you're desperate for at least a decent quarterback. Miami was there for years prior to Tannehill, and I tell people that over and over. I'm like, I understand that Tannehill is not Tom Brady. I understand that he's not Dan Marino. But I'm like, do you remember the years of Cleo Lemon and these guys that we had in there at quarterback when we were playing, the worst quarterbacks in the league? When you get into that scenario, that's where, Kirk Cousins will get paid just because, what they're doing anything they can do just to get a reliable quarterback in there. And at this point in their careers, I can't say that Tannehill's way better than Kirk Cousins, and I can't say that Kirk Cousins is way better than Tannehill. Has Kirk Cousins proved it? No, but I'm just very glad that I'm not in a scenario where I've got to decide now whether or not to franchise the guy or pay him a massive deal, or if you franchise tag him or give him a huge deal, if he bombs in Washington, then you look terrible. But how bad do you look if, let's say, Kirk Cousins just goes to the Browns and just lights up the division and becomes an all-pro quarterback? Then how does your legacy look in Washington when you had him and you just let him walk?
All the same as the men giving up, $1 billion first-round picks for Robert Griffin. I mean, it's clear that these guys aren't really worried about the stigmas they have right now. The Dolphins are criticized for overpaying free agents and being used in negotiations and whatnot. But let's be honest. I mean, in terms of modern NFL football, the Redskins wrote the book on that, and I mean that's something that it doesn't even faze them. I mean, they're right back in it, and I think for a lot of things you mentioned, and they probably feel they have to franchise this guy on a deal where it's pretty much their version of prove it. Because I mean, I think he's good. Clearly he's good to compete in the NFC East, which I don't know if that's really saying much.
It's not.
But this also should serve as a reminder to a lot of Dolphins fans who just want to go ahead and toss Tannehill out with the dinner scraps. That I mean, these guys don't grow on trees. And I mean, Kirk Cousins, who was I think a 4th round pick in the same draft where they took a guy number 2 overall, is potentially going to be franchised and could become, for some reason, a hot commodity. So, I mean, if you go ahead and you find a guy you think you can win with him, and I mean that's going to be one of the big objectives with the Gase regime, I think you go ahead and you stick with him, and you don't come to this conclusion that you're just going to go ahead and flip him out or toss him and then just draft another guy. So, I mean, that's kind of my thinking with it. But I'm amused by this whole discussion where you've got Kirk Cousins discussed as one, potentially like a big name quarterback in the NFL. I didn't think he would ever come to that point.
All right. So, yeah, I think we've had enough quarterback talk for one night. What do you guys think?
Agreed.
Yeah. All right. So that's going to be it for tonight's show. I want to thank Ron Caniff of Unsquish the Fish for coming back on and making his triumphant return to radio.
That was good. Thanks, Ron.
Nice. Yeah, it was fun.
All right, and for myself, Chad Ronnebaum, my co-host, and of course Keith Beebe of the Phinsider with a PH, I will see you all next time for another long show of PhinManiacs football podcasting. And I think my brain just kind of flipped out there. So sorry, folks.